Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Josh Button Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dawson Church, and we're going to learn, if you're not aware, what EFT is. What is tapping? What is emotional freedom? But first, Mr. Church, Mr. Dawson, would you please tell us how you got into the health and wellness space in the beginning and what brought you here and what led you into your expertise on the subject before you started working with other people?
Yeah, happily, Josh. And it was really interesting because, like many people in this space, I got into it because of my own issues. And when I was a teenager, I was suicidal. I was really miserable and depressed. I left home at 15, joined a spiritual community, and many, many years growing organic food and meditating and learning energy healing and all these things. And I got a little bit happier and a little bit less miserable, but I then said, well, spirituality is not really moving the needle. Let's try psychology. So I got into that, eventually got into publishing, book publishing, and was facilitating publication of a lot of books in the spirituality and also the natural health field. And after a while, I began to realize there were some techniques that were emerging that were simply such orders of magnitude better than modern medicine had available, that I need to move from being simply a describer of these things to be an advocate for them. So I began putting together research teams around 2000, began to research some of these techniques. For example, we worked with a ton of Vietnam veterans around that time, and we found that with certain protocols, especially emotional freedom techniques that you mentioned, we could take a veteran who had had 40 years of flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, avoidance, all the PTSD symptoms, and within 6 1-hour sessions, those symptoms were gone and never came back. And I realized we needed to move into the business of really getting this into mainstream, the VA, Kaiser Permanente, Cleveland Clinic. So I began to do research, and now we produced over 200 clinical trials of EFT. They show it's phenomenally effective for these kinds of issues. And now we're using it in Ukraine, for example, with psychologists. We're training psychologists in Ukraine. We're training people in different conflict zones. And these are a game changer. We now can treat most cases of anxiety, depression, PTSD, phobias very, very rapidly. So that's really what inspires me and what drives me nowadays.
All right, so forgive my complete ignorance on the subject, but are we talking about something in cohesion with pharmaceuticals, or is this completely independent of pharmaceuticals?
It certainly does produce pharmaceuticals, but they're all inside your own brain. And we have all these neurotransmitters like anandamide, like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, beta endorphin, nitric oxide. And what our brains do is, under certain conditions, produce those naturally. Most people don't know this. In fact, I wrote a whole book called Bliss Brain about those neurotransmitters because people have no idea. They want fentanyl, or they want Oxycontin, or they want marijuana, or they want ecstasy, simply because they have no idea that our brains produce all of those substances endogenously. In fact, the reason why they actually work, I mean, hemp, for example, has over 100,000 different molecules in it. Why does one of them, THC, produce an effect on the brain, and only one out of 100,000? And the reason is because THC docks with receptors in our brains for a native neurotransmitter called anandamide. That's the only reason that one molecule works, is it has the same molecular shape as anandamide, and it docks there. So we have all of these pleasure-producing neurochemicals in our brains. We aren't trained to release them, and so what people wind up doing is they wind up looking for thrills and stimulation outside. And outside things definitely mean marijuana will deliver this, but all of these ecstasy, all of these drugs, they're going to have side effects. And the research into the side effects of the drugs shows they have a pretty high cost, biological cost to us of taking them, whereas your own native ones don't. So what I train people in doing, there's certain techniques that we know now will spike dopamine, for example, the same neurochemical that we get from cocaine, heroin, other reward type drugs. It'll spike your dopamine with certain kinds of meditation, for example, by 65%. So you're sitting there in meditation and you turn on that dopamine switch just by meditative practices, and bingo, you basically feel like you got a shot of heroin. So we do this with people, and in fact we have drug addicts who just get addicted to all these inner chemicals and then don't need the outside stuff anymore. So that's really the way our brains work, and why these experiences are so incredibly pleasurable.
Right. So I have some experience with this myself, but with breath work. And
Yes,
breath work was my introduction to actually meditation as well, because previously to breath work, I tried to meditate and I wouldn't say I couldn't. I would just say that maybe it didn't make quite as much sense to myself or to me. And maybe my effort was just misguided. But once I participated in Wim Hof and then several different breathwork seminars, all of a sudden it made sense. And all of a sudden I was actually experiencing different results from it. So is this something that you guys use as well?
absolutely. Breathing is absolutely critical. In fact, if you go back to ancient texts like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, over 2,000 years old in written form, over 10,000 years old in oral form, you find that they say that breath work is the cornerstone of these altered states. And so that's an absolutely fundamental thing. If you just do that one thing alone, you're going to have better results. Now, if you do that, what I developed in 2009, I was hearing a lot of great research and wonderful new techniques coming along. There was EFT tapping, acupressure, there was heart math and heart coherence, there was breath work, there was self hypnosis. And what I did was I wondered what would happen if I stacked all of those on top of each other. If I did tapping and breath work and heart coherence and self hypnosis and mindfulness, and like just like building a sandwich, put them all on top of each other, will my head explode? So I did it. And I found that not only did my head not explode, but I could easily meditate when I was doing these evidence-based practices. So I labeled this thing eco meditation, ECO meditation. Stuck it up on the web, didn't think much of it, did it myself. I mean, I did it with a few groups, like I did with a conference of 200 people that same year, and suddenly everybody dropped into heart coherence together. And people reported afterwards they were able to meditate so easily with this thing. We had veterans who wrote into us and said, I stumbled across eco meditation. Suddenly I can meditate. It's really easy. And the reason it's so easy is just all evidence-based stuff. It's not spiritual. No beliefs required. Don't believe in a guru or a spiritual path. You just do these things mechanically with your body, and they bingo put you into that elevated state. So I began to I mean, it got out there. Tony Robbins learned it. A bunch of coaches learned it, and eventually my webmaster came to me and said, we're having 10,000 people a month go to the site, better do some research. So we did our first study then in 2015, did a bunch more studies, eventually did a giant study using MRIs. And the MRI study was just mind blowing. We found that in 30 days of using this stack of evidence based techniques called eco meditation, in only a month, with MRIs compared to a control group, we saw structural and functional changes in the brain like these people were 10,000-hour meditators. I mean, we just, when we saw those results, we were like, we didn't even know how to think about it. It was so radical that you can change your brain, change the structure and the function of your brain. And two big things happened in the brain. One was that the part of the brain that ruminates, that just dials up all the bad stuff and makes you think about problems of yesterday and your traumas and fears of the future and all those that part of the brain just went quiet. And the other part that got highly active after 30 days was the compassion, gratitude, generosity, or positive emotion part of the brain. The insula, that lobe became highly active. And it only took a month to do that. Obviously, you want to do it for more than a month. And in fact, we found that once people start to get all this anandamide and serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin flowing in their brains, they don't want to stop. Like one woman came to me, and I always say, meditate 30 days. Just download the free eco meditation track, stick it in on your phone, download it. It's all free online. Do it for 30 days without missing a day. And this one woman walked up to me at a conference and said, I took your 30-day challenge, Dr. Church. I did it for 30 days and I didn't miss a day. And just, she was so excited about it. And I asked her, I said, and what day are you on now? She said, I'm on day 147. So now she's hooked on all these pleasurable brain chemicals, this feel good stuff. Her brain's restructuring itself. You want to feel that good in the morning, and doing a meditation goes from being a chore, which was for me before that, to being a pleasure. So yeah, it's really easy if you have the right techniques, but you have to have scientifically based techniques. Again, a lot of this stuff, the stuff I learned, Josh, as a young man in an ashram about how to meditate, it was like a catalog of how not to do it. Try and sit still and still your mind. We can't still our minds. I mean, I've been meditating now for about 55 years and I can't still my mind. So I'm a total failure when it comes to that meditation instruction because our minds are meant to be highly active. I mean, we grew up, our minds evolved in a hostile environment where we had to be highly alert what was going on around us. So trying to still our minds just doesn't work usually. And so you want to pick something that's science-based, evidence-based. All the techniques that they taught me in the ashram were pretty much, I mean, they were made me feel a little bit better, but weren't very effective. As science now, MRI research, EEG research, neuroscience research, hormonal research, genetic research gives us these fantastic techniques, and they're evidence-based. They work. They don't take 10,000 hours, and you can get there, and you feel it in your body right away. So that's what I recommend people grab onto and just start using.
Is there a science-based reasoning for the 30 days? Is it the 18 to 30 day window becomes a habit? And that's why you developed that, or
Studies show that it takes more like 70 days to really ingrain a habit. And what happens is when we start to learn things, we have to use willpower and we have to use decision making, executive capacity in our brains. That means the outer layer of the brain, the neocortex. But say, for example, you start to do that and you do it for a while. What happens is that learning then migrates down to the inner parts of the brain. So initially, it's really hard. I'm thinking, oh, what I'm learning French, what comes after 9 and 10 and 11. And then after a while, you find yourself just getting fluent in those new abilities. So it takes a while to do that. 30 days seem for eco meditation seems to be the time that if people do it, they hardly ever stop because these are all learning chemicals. Like dopamine is a learning chemical. It's a very highly pleasurable motivational molecule. It wants you to go out and do things. And initially, for our ancestors a million years ago, doing stuff meant going out and finding roots and shoots and sources of clean water and learning to hunt an animal and trap that rodent or dig those grubs out of that log. So that was our motivational molecule. Feels good. And our brain gives us that reward. We found the tuber. We found that potato in the ground. So we get this rush of dopamine, how we evolved for our brain to be telling us this is important, this is pleasurable, do it again. And if you can attach that mechanism to meditation, then you are going to naturally want to meditate. And you rarely stop after you feel that good. I mean, why would you want to wake up in the morning and, have all the random thoughts going through your head? You want to get into the meditative place and then trigger those great feelings in your brain and feel those reward chemicals. So that's really what and it seems to take 30 days to get the cycle going to the point where people, if they skip a day after that, they'll feel it. They'll notice that they didn't go quite as well today. I wasn't really in flow because that's what these states trigger. They trigger flow states in the brain. And that's what you want to live in during the day. You're way more creative, way more productive when you're in flow. And that is generated by morning meditation.
so I do something myself that is I would like to consider moving meditation at this point in time. Not when I first started, but at the point where I'm at now, and that's jujitsu. And it's a really interesting dynamic when you have somebody who's trying to maybe alter your state by breaking a limb or putting you in a choke or putting you in a position where you have to actually work through puzzle pieces and through problems. But there is a flow state to it once you get to a certain comfort level and you've seen these problems present themselves before, you've worked through them. Every now and then something will pop up that you're not really used to, but that actually just triggers more interest and more engagement in the moment. So is this something that I'm doing just randomly that's actually accomplishing a similar result?
Yes, there are flow triggers, and there is what's called the skills challenge ratio. Like my thing is mountain biking. I go out mountain biking usually twice a day for maybe 30 minutes, sometimes a little bit more. And just I've pretty busy day, pretty heavy workload, but I always make sure I get out, and even if it's pouring rain and freezing cold, I'll get on a mountain bike. And there's the skills challenge ratio, and you want to make sure that you're challenging yourself a little bit. And if you're challenging yourself a little bit, like if I go around that curve a little faster than I used to, or take a bit of a different route, then that's upping the level of challenge for me. Because on a mountain bike, you're way up there, you're doing 30 miles an hour. If you make a mistake, it's not pretty. The helmet's going to take care of your brain, but what happens to the rest of you? So you want to that's again, that's the skills challenge ratio. You want to be a little bit challenging, and that, like, at 3%, 5% challenge, you get into flow. If you have 20% challenge, you're going to get into stress. So you want to produce a little bit of cortisol. And I've done a lot of research on cortisol. A little bit of cortisol, that's really good for attention and focus. Too much cortisol is overwhelming and scary. So what you're doing is you've found your flow triggers. You've just found your way of triggering that with the right amount of challenge. It's challenging for you. So you have to be paying complete attention, you have to be in the moment. What happens is that part of the brain that holds our suffering, that constructs the suffering self, it's called the mid-prefrontal cortex, and it's right behind the eyebrows. This sliver of tissue called the mid-prefrontal cortex, and quietens down when you're in flow. It quietens down when you're in the present moment. When you're in the past or future, it's active, and when you're in the past or future, you tend to suffer. You tend to worry about the bad stuff in the past and the stuff that might be bad in the future. So getting into flow is all about triggering that state, and you've found it. You found your way of doing it. In my books, I talk about 7 styles of meditation, and you want to find the style that works for you, which will be different for each person. Some people are going to need a moving meditation. My wife loves yoga. She's okay with sitting, but she really loves yoga. I like qigong. I like mountain biking. I like sitting meditation. For some people, it's going to be music. Just they'll go into ecstasy when they are dancing to certain tracks. Other people, it's going to be reading. They're going to read the Dhammapada by the Buddha. They're going to read the Bible. They're going to read the Hindu scriptures like the Crest Jewel Illumination or the Vedas or the Bhagavad Gita, and that reading will take them into elevated states. So you need to find, our brains work differently, and you can use the techniques of eco meditation with all of these different styles, but find the style that works well for your body and puts you into that flow state. You found yours.
Actually, there's another one. I walk a tightrope. It's a slack line, but I use it like a tightrope, and that's another one of those things that I do. And I do get a little bit of a physical workout from it. I'm obviously, engaging stabilizers and working my balance, but it is more about having that space ahead of me and being in the moment and present and just zoned out, so to speak.
Absolutely. If you get distracted on that slack rope or tightrope, you fall off.
Yeah, and if you move it off the ground high enough as you get better at it, you have a little bit more consequence, so you're a little more engaged and yeah. So let's talk about the techniques that you mentioned. What first of all is tapping?
Tapping's really good, and that's what we use with veterans, people who are stressed, people who can't get out of their trauma. If you have had a tragic event, a shattering event in your life, you cannot easily rescue yourself from trauma. And you certainly can't do it by thinking. You try and think your way out of trauma. You're having these traumatic memories. You're having these replays in your brain all the time of traumatic events. And saying to yourself, don't do that, doesn't work. The prefrontal cortex, the executive centers, cannot intervene in the stressed brain because stress was crucial to the way our ancestors survived. So when I'm stressed, that just takes precedence over all other signaling. And the one thing that I've found that can really make a difference, can really break that trauma loop, is when you tap. And tapping is very simple. You just tap on acupressure points. When you do that, it stops that traumatic recycling of those old memories. Like one guy, he was an Iraq veteran I worked with, and we were in a really beautiful conference center. He was sitting there in a chair with me, and someone walked in, and they had a plastic bottle, and they took the plastic bottle and they crackled it. They made this crackling sound, and this guy had a full-blown trauma response because it sounded like gunfire, reminded him of gunfire in Iraq. So he was ready to dive under the desk. He was so triggered. 10 out of 10 on the emotional triggering scale. And Iraq had been like 10 years before. Here he's still triggered all these years later by an innocuous sound. So we worked with him on some terrible memories from Iraq, and we just did that tapping. We had him think about the events, and we had him tap. He went down to a 0, from a 10 out of 10 to a 0 out of 10 around those memories in just a few minutes. So tapping is really effective. It calms the emotional brain. It sends a signal of calm to the emotional brain. It just shuts down the stress response. After that, I asked the person with a plastic bottle, do it again. Let's see how he reacts. He was totally calm. He was just laughing. It's like, his response, trauma response had gone away. So tapping is super effective at telling the brain that you are okay. Now is now. Iraq is 10 years ago. I do not still have to be acting in that way and getting triggered by all these innocuous sounds. And that's why we use it with people in places like Ukraine. We're training therapists there on a large scale. We've been training people in the VA hospitals lately to use tapping, and it's an incredibly effective way of getting people out of that looping trauma.
Now, will this work with somebody who's operating in fight or flight? Just let's say they're diabetics, they have chronic stress, they're going about their day, they have traffic that they're getting into on the way to work and just getting triggered by all of these things. Is that a technique that they would be able to utilize as well?
Yeah, because it only takes about there are only 13 tapping points we tap, and just tapping them for 5 or 10 times each, then moving on to the next one is something you would do in a couple of minutes. So it really quickly shifts you. And if you are in that state, if you are in chronic stress, please use tapping. I just want to pretty much beg you to use it. I mean, just try it a few times and see it makes a difference. And I want you to use it. I'm so passionate about this because the VA published a huge multi-year, tens of thousands of people study earlier this year, and it looked at people who had taken care of themselves, physically taking care of themselves, eating well, exercising, clean food, clean water, clean minds, and those at the opposite end of the spectrum, people who are not taking care of themselves. And they were looking at what effect these lifestyles produced on longevity. And, just as you're listening to Josh and I right now, just guess what the difference was between the two groups, the groups taking care of themselves and the groups not taking care of themselves, that were stressing themselves through poor lifestyle choices, through poor emotion management. What was the difference in, just guess what the difference was? I mean, just in your own mind, think what was the difference in longevity between the two groups? And this giant government study found that the difference in longevity between the people taking care of themselves, their stress, their lifestyle, and those that weren't was 24 years. The stressed people died 24 years earlier than the unstressed people. So when I'm saying I'm begging you to tap, I'm begging you for your own sake to just start meditating and tapping right away. I mean, don't let another day go by. That's why I tell people, do it for 30 days. Just commit with me to 30 days. Go to my website, download all the stuff. It's absolutely free on my website. Go download it, start doing it. It takes a few minutes every day, and then you'll put yourself on course toward a way better future and a much longer life.
All right, this stimulates interest, or I guess an intrigue in your opinion on medication. Somebody who's been diagnosed traditionally, I guess you would put it, and has associated and identified with their diagnosis. Are they in a place to use and utilize this first and foremost to overcome the symptoms that they're incurring or what they're feeling?
Well, medicine has given us a whole group of marvels over the course of the last century. And part of the reason that we live twice as long as our great grandparents did a century ago is because of modern sanitation, modern science, modern medicine. And so there are all kinds of inventions we get, like, acute treatment for acute infections that would have killed our grandparents, where we shrug them off in just a little bit of time. Uh, Broken bones, we have the ability to do all kinds of miraculous things now we didn't have. So a lot of these are useful, and they have limitations, and it's really worth knowing what the limitations are. and they don't work well. Modern medicine, what it can't fix is a bad diet. It can't fix a lack of exercise. It can't fix poor self management. It can't fix negative thinking. In fact, one study looked at Alzheimer's patients, and I have a new book out called Spiritual Intelligence. In chapter 2 of Spiritual Intelligence, it's all about Alzheimer's because the Alzheimer's brain shrinks a lot. People naturally, their brains shrink about 25% between the ages of 40 and 85. The Alzheimer's brain can shrink 70%. These people with severe brain shrinkage. And one study looked at people who were negative thinkers, and they found that the more they thought negatively, the greater their risk for Alzheimer's was. And it scaled. The more negative thinking, the more Alzheimer's plaques they got in their brain. So you really want to take care of yourself. You want to use modern medicine when appropriate. But for heaven's sakes, just use things like emotional self-management, because that is going to do you a huge amount of good regardless of your medication. So use medication wisely. Talk to your doctor about other options. If you walk into your doctor's office and say, I'm meditating now, they will be delighted because you're taking responsibility for yourself. And then if you are on medication, a good model comes from the Veterans Administration. We published a report in 2017 where we looked at the use of medication in the Oklahoma City VA. And these were veterans who were being medicated with heavy duty psychiatric drugs, and often several of them at one time, including drugs to control the severe side effects of the antipsychotics they were taking. And what the nurses were doing there in the Oklahoma City VA is they were tapping. They were doing EFT tapping with these veterans. So the veterans became calmer and more stable. At that point, the psychiatrist could reduce the amount of drugs, the dosage. Then the nurses tapped with the veterans more. Then the psychiatrist could reduce the dosage further. So many of these drugs, too, you can't just stop cold turkey. You have to do it intelligently, and you have to gradually wean yourself off of them. But they were doing that successfully in the Oklahoma City VA. So use drugs where you need to. Do everything natural that you possibly can. Like, for example, I have high blood pressure. I've had high blood pressure my whole adult life, and I did all the things. I lost weight. I used supplements. I changed my diet. I did all kinds of things, and I was able to lower my blood pressure quite a bit. But eventually, it was still a little bit too high, and I had to go to the doctor and say, "Okay, I'm ready for medication." So don't be stubborn about it. I mean, maybe seeing good results from the all the natural stuff you're doing, but then you may need medication too. And if so, that's one other way of helping yourself toward health. All of these things are appropriate. We also have a chapter in a book I wrote called Soul Medicine, chapter 15. It's how to work with both alternative medicine and conventional medicine. And you want to have the best possible care team drawing from all those worlds. So it's a both and case. And often people can release the need for drugs. So for example, with EFT tapping, there's now a bunch of research showing that diabetics who are tapping their markers, their diabetic markers, and their blood sugar markers improve dramatically. A lot of them are able to get off of insulin if they tap and have a good lifestyle. So things like diabetes, all we can do is manage it with medical interventions. Take responsibility for yourself. Tap, eat a healthy diet, and then suddenly you're going to find very likely you can reduce your medication, and many people are getting off the medication completely. So it depends. Sometimes you're going to need medication. Other times you're going to want to release medication you don't need if you can find natural ways to address those issues.
Right. So I can't help but notice you're pretty conscious with the background you have there and the words on it. And if you're listening to the podcast, some of those words are authenticity and forgiveness and graciousness and honesty, idealism. And I see them and I can't help but think that this is another form of medicine. This is something that you can only associate with positivity. You can only associate with good self-talk if you're actually putting that in front of your vision, and that is part of your vision. So is this one of the resources, one of the things that you offer and you suggest for people to do?
Yeah, so spiritual intelligence, which is the title of my newest book, is a capacity that human consciousness has and the human brain has. And this is a really startling discovery, very, very new discovery to neuroscience, that if you activate spiritual intelligence, there are four circuits in your brain that fire up. One of them is the attention network. You pay closer attention. Another one is the emotion regulation network. You can regulate your negative emotions better. One is the part that dials down that suffering self of the mid-prefrontal cortex, and the fourth circuit is compassion. So all of those circuits start to come online, and they are stimulated by relaxation, meditation, and other forms of cultivating spiritual intelligence, one of which is the words, the people, the environment you have. And so I had an artist many years ago, an artist friend of mine, made this giant poster behind my desk over here with all of my favorite values on it. So I walk into my office every day. I see that that's my background. I'm swimming in it every day. Whatever you can do to spark that. So in spiritual intelligence, I give you free resources at the end of each chapter. I say, go download this free meditation, go to this free website, get this link over here, watch this program, and we help you actually build spiritual intelligence by cultivating these values every week by week as you read the book, as you go through 7 chapters, and there's 7 exercises as well, which are going to steadily move you along that continuum. And again, what we're seeing, for example, in the research on Alzheimer's is that people who are cultivating spiritual intelligence are not only in several randomized controlled trials now, they don't just halt that brain shrinkage, they don't halt cognitive decline. Their brains actually start growing again. And this is like one of those mind boggling research findings that the brain actually begins to regrow itself if you are cultivating spiritual intelligence. Another dimension of the book in chapter 5 is business. I looked at people and their businesses, their entrepreneurial careers, and whatever they were doing in their work life. We found that after just a month of cultivating spiritual intelligence, their productivity had risen 20%. That's like getting an extra day a week. I mean, their productivity went up dramatically, and it didn't take 10,000 hours. It took only 30 days to start to see those effects. So now that's why I love science, because it helps us measure all this stuff, and we are just guessing that this is making us do better and feel better. We have these results from studies. So yeah, it helps your brain health, it helps your cognitive ability, helps your attention span, and then ultimately you're a much more productive human being.
I can't help but notice one of the things on your own Instagram that is just completely um, aligned with what I believe and what I've noticed and what has worked for me, and that's journaling. Journaling and the importance that it's played for myself in my growth and my productivity going up and my goals being increased and just doing the things that I'm doing now that are serving me, that are serving others. What do you recommend for individuals who have not quite journaled or have, maybe dabbled in it a little bit and really didn't get anything from it? What's the steps and how does that modality actually pay dividends with our physical and mental health both?
Journaling is worth doing as a tool for mindfulness, and just journaling about what you ate last night for dinner or who you hung out with and the dirty jokes they told at the bar, that's not going to do much for your health or your well-being. But if you focus on your consciousness, like what ideas excite you? When I go to a conference, like I'll be going to one in January, for example, with all kinds of wonderful people: Marianne Williamson, Jack Canfield. I'm a member of Don Miguel Ruiz. I'm a member of a club that we all get together every 6 months and just exchange ideas. I'll be there with my journal. I'll listen to these great speakers and I'll write down their concepts. So you want to really engage with powerful ideas and then find a way of turning those into an action plan. So after every single conference I've been going to for the last 50 years, I have those journal entries. I then say, at the end of the conference, okay, here are the ones I will take action on. And that's how you shift your life. So you want to make sure it's a journal of meaning. If you read my journal, you'll actually have no idea who I had dinner with last night or what events are happening in the outside world. It just doesn't register for me. What's happening that's important and valuable and significant is the journey of consciousness. We are here as beings of consciousness. Spiritual intelligence is the ability, using those four brain regions, to allow your individual consciousness to become one with, to connect with all of consciousness, the consciousness that drives the planets of the universe. So that's the exciting journey we're on. That's why we're here, is to wake up. And so journaling used that way is going to be powerful. Journaling just used to record trivia is going to be, it's going to be make you a little bit mindful. But what is the exciting, most relevant, most impactful experiences you're having now? And then how can you develop those, apply those, and expand those in your life?
Now, is there any role for gratitude specifically, or for affirmations, or for anything that will keep you open to new and focusing on those things that are really important?
Gratitude is worth doing. A journal can help you do that. And the classic example is to write down 3 gratitudes every morning and 3 gratitudes every evening. Very, very simple, just one line for each. That's going to take you all of 2 minutes. So that's one way to get going with journaling. Just write down 3 gratitudes. And here's the caveat is you aren't allowed to repeat one. So it has to be 3 new ones. And that might seem like a lot. If you do the math, that's 6 a day. That's going to be over 1,000 in a year. And you'll find as you get into the habit of gratitude, just like yesterday, I was mountain biking along a route I have mountain biked probably over 500 times before. And I just looked to the side and noticed a beautiful grove of trees I'd never seen before. So you will find when you attune your brain to gratitude, you find more things to be grateful for. Whatever you use your brain to pay attention to tends to grow. And one of the paradoxes, and I write about this in another book of mine called Mind to Matter. And when we pay attention to stuff, we grow the brain circuitry. As those neurons fire together and wire together, we become more aware of them. So now we're becoming more aware of things to be grateful for by triggering gratitude deliberately daily. So now suddenly you're writing a list of 100 things a day, and you never run out of things to be grateful for. You see that grove of trees and their beautiful colors you've never seen before. You notice things about I've been married for a very, very long time, and I just see things about my wife every day that I admire and enjoy, about my kids and my grandkids, about people in the world around me, about my home. So when you put yourself in that energy, when you are firing and wiring those neurons, for one thing, those parts of the brain are growing at a furious pace. In one case history in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, this man who began to become mindful and measured he had brain measurements before and after. In 8 weeks, some parts of his brain grew 3 or 4% in just a few weeks. So this is actually triggering growth in those circuits. And then suddenly your life becomes so full of blessings, so much to get grateful for, that when you hit the hard times, when you lose your job, when the economy goes sour, when you have a major medical problem, when you get divorced, when things don't go your way, you have this phenomenon called resilience, not as a abstract quality, as brain tissue. And literally, you then are a resilient person. And so there's a whole chapter in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, about turning a state of well-being like resilience to a trait of well-being where you are then a resilient person fundamentally at the structure of your brain. No one can take that away from you when that happens. And when you look at the brains of these people who are doing all this, they're very, very different as you cultivate these qualities day in and day out. So I'd encourage you, that journal, whatever else you have of being mindful, however you develop spiritual intelligence, download all the free meditations at the end of each chapter, cultivate spiritual intelligence, grow it, expand it, and within a very short while, you're likely to find your life shifting as this starts to then play out in the world around you as it affects the people and everything you do as you're expressing those qualities.
Awesome. How important is belief in itself?
Belief is important and it's useful, but it has to be hooked up to passion to really create brain change. So, a belief about something to which you're fairly indifferent is not going to produce much firing or wiring. But if you passionately believe, for example, in kindness or compassion, that is going to really shift the needle. And the same thing with religion. Like I said, that eco meditation doesn't require you to be religious or spiritual or believe in anything. So it works great if you're an atheist or an agnostic, no belief required. But if, for example, you believe as well say you're, I know a friend who's a really observant Jew, and his Judaism and his Torah practice is so important to him. Now he has passion around that, and that's going to shift you. So just being having a small amount of emotional energy will not change your brain very much. If you are absolutely passionate, for example, about your spiritual practice, it's going to change your brain really rapidly. Love, if you love extravagantly, if you are kind and compassionate and joyful, and you just amp up the volume on those things, that emotion regulation circuit in the brain that is turned on by spiritual intelligence is really useful for regulating negative emotions like anger and frustration and resentment. And that brain tissue, it actually runs right from an area over here into the middle of the brain, the runs from the forebrain into the limbic system, the emotional midbrain. And that piece of tissue becomes stronger in time, and it regulates all these negative emotions. But what it also does is it starts to be useful to upregulate positive ones too. So there is a whole chapter in spiritual intelligence on the awakened experience. And these monks and nuns and meditators and people who are activating spiritual intelligence, they gain the ability as they grow that brain tissue, they gain the ability to actually upregulate love, joy, gratitude, all these positive emotions, and they just flood their lives with these positive emotions. And so they're living in this state all the time. Very, very different life from somebody who's driven by the negative emotions. So I mean the benefits of doing this are hard to overstate. And again, you see the shifts in your life in that first 30 days. So that's what I want to recommend you do as you listen to Josh and I chat over here is take that 30-day challenge. Say, I will download that track and I will meditate for just 30 days, 20 minutes a day without fail in the morning. Don't miss a day. And it's likely, like that lady I met at the conference, that on day 147, you will be having such a good time, you'll never stop.
Now, do affirmations or mantras play a role in this?
They can. And again, it depends on whether they are spoken or used with passion, or whether they're just people going through the routine. Like I know a lot of Buddhists, for example, are taught to chant their mantras. And of course, in transcendental meditation, TM, people get a mantra. And so that can be useful to you if there's real passion behind your mantra. Too many people, though, in those movements, they just wind up using their mantra as a routine. It's lost all of its juice. You want stuff that's juicy. In research, we find that people who are going with the energy, who are going where it's juiciest, are going to make progress. And that means they often abandon their spiritual practices and beliefs and find ones that are juicy. So they were doing this one meditation or this one mantra for a while. It lost its impact. They aren't really doing it with any kind of a degree of passion anymore. You'll find a new one. So those people tend to make progress if they're going for where the energy is. If you're just doing the same old spiritual practice over and over and over again for years or decades, it's going to likely lose its ability to have that emotional zing for you. So find what just makes your heart sing. Find what just totally turns you on. It's going to change over time. People change a lot as they're cultivating spiritual intelligence. And so it's a terrifying prospect sometimes to let go of techniques that have served you really well. You've done this thing for the last 15 years. It's really helped you with addictions, or it's helped. Like we had one guy actually that was his problem. He had this really powerful set of techniques and been doing it for about 25 years for addictions and depression, to control his addictions and get out of depression. And then we're talking about this and saying, hey, what's fresh and new for you now? And he was saying, I can't let go of this old routine. It's what saved me from just being lost to my addictions. And so he didn't want to let go of it. It's just like this comforting blanket has been wrapping himself in for so many years. And yes, people can get very stuck in that way. And we find the people who make the most progress or the most brain change are those who'll say, I'm just going to let go. And after a while, also, you learn to trust. You're letting go of your small local ego. You're surrendering yourself and abandoning yourself to the cosmos, to the universal intelligence. You trust that. You know it's going to guide you. And so there's this wonderful guidance that starts to flow. And you can pick up a practice, put it down again, pick up the ones that are useful to you, set them aside. And so those mantras and those words, those chants might be really useful to you at times in your life, and be prepared to set them aside when they've lost that ability to evoke passion in your mind, in your brain, in your emotions.
Yeah, the only constant in life is change, right?
Yeah,
So, what advice do you have for somebody who's found themselves in that predicament when they are feeling a little bit like, I don't want to say burnout, but like it's not serving them anymore. The routines that have saved them from themselves in so many ways, or the thing that brought them up from despair. What's their next step, and how do they find it? Or and what part is surrender in that process?
that's a very good question, Josh. So, what do you do when what essentially all of us do stall out at some times? We're moving ahead in our personal growth process, and then what we're doing isn't moving the needle in a way in which it used to be. And that's where this ability to connect with something larger than yourself starts to shift you. One of the interesting studies in spiritual intelligence that I looked at was I wondered if there's a plateau we reach when we're in what the Buddhists call nirvana or the Sufis call heaven. There are all these visions of reaching these plateaus of bliss and joy, samadhi in Hinduism. And so what happens when you reach that point? Are you at the static level of absolute bliss and nothing ever changes? And there's some intriguing research comparing the brains of monks who had done 10,000 hours of meditation, which is a lot. I mean, they've done a ton of meditation. Another group of monks had done 40,000 hours of meditation, which is a crazy amount. Most people in a lifetime will never do 40,000 hours. And the research finding was that after 40,000 hours, even at that plateau, the brain kept changing. And the way it was changing was in a really interesting way. The amygdala, which is the fire alarm, which is the stress center of the brain, the amygdala was shrinking quite a bit. I mean, quite dramatically between 10,000 and 40,000 hours. So your stress response is getting less and less and less. Also, the nucleus accumbens, a part of the brain tied to addictions and repetitive action, was also getting smaller. So these two parts of the brain to do with addiction and stress were actually shrinking. And so these monks were getting happier and happier and happier, even after 40,000 hours. And there's no end point. You just keep on moving in this path, letting go of things that don't work for you, staying in that groove of what passionately engages you. And you'll find that there's no there's no ideal point. There's no nirvana you get to beyond which there's nothing else. You get to some pretty awesome states. And again, I use in the book Spiritual Intelligence, I use the term samadhi, the Hindu term for that blissful heavenly state. But even there, I discuss 4 levels of samadhi in the book. And then there are another 10 levels about that. So we get to these extraordinary states. We live there. We find our lives transform utterly on the outside as well as the inside. And then it's a never ending journey. And you just find yourself continually having new discoveries. And then, of course, eventually, after a certain amount of time, you're getting old. The body starts to slow down. So then these monks become 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. What do they do now? The physical body's shutting down. It turns out there's a final phase called Mahasamadhi, where you train yourself to move your consciousness up and out of your body at the moment of death. So Paramahansa Yogananda, many Ramakrishna, many great teachers master this, and then they have a conscious death. So even as your body is slowing down, as your body is getting more frail toward the end of your life, there are lessons to learn on that journey to consciousness. And it is the most exciting journey I can possibly imagine going on. When you're on the journey of consciousness, when you're exploring these states of super consciousness, then you find that it's intriguing, it's absorbing, it's what you were meant to do here. We're meant to, that's fundamentally why we're here, is to allow our individual consciousness to merge with and become one with all of consciousness. So you're in nature and you're standing there looking at the sunset and you let go of being this little struggling human being and you become one with all of nature. And so that kind of experience really is the way we're meant to live, being in flow, being in the state of having our spiritual intelligence turned on, and then you have a very, very different life, and there's no end point at which you've done it all, you've experienced it all. You just keep on in that space, and then eventually there's the next adventure after the body dies.
So, are we creating the kingdom of heaven, or are we just observing it finally?
Well, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is here, and the Sufis say the same thing. And one of the interesting things, chapter 7 of Spiritual Intelligence addresses the belief most people have right now that the world is worse today than it's been before, that we're heading for extinction and doom. And so if you look at the data, and again, any question that you have, go to science, see what science says. Forget about superstition and belief and opinion. Go see what the data shows you. And the data shows us that a lot of people in the world are getting more depressed and think that the world is getting worse. Like the percentage of young men who are not depressed, but who are at the lowest rung of depression, which is despair. The percentage of young men in despair has doubled in the last 30 years. Okay, so young men getting more and more despairing. Percentage of young women in despair has tripled in the last 30 years. In some countries like Mexico and India, the number of people who rank themselves 0 out of 10 for happiness is over 20%. Over 1 in 5 people don't even rank themselves at a 1 on that scale of 0 to 10 for happiness. They say, my life is so bad, it could not get worse. That's 20% of the population in a lot of these countries. Americans, 5 times as many people are on the bottom run of the happiness level ladder today than were there 30 years ago. So that's happening for a lot of people, that they believe they're living in a disintegrating world, that it's terrible. But what the same studies show is that the top roughly 20% of people are absolutely flying. They have never felt better. They're filling their lives with love, gratitude, joy, and they are living in an extraordinary world. And what I write about in that last chapter of Spiritual Intelligence is these people who are in despair and these people who are living in heaven, they're living in the same world, eating the same food, reading the same news, living under the same governments, work for the same corporations, and yet, you know, some of them are in heaven, some of them are in hell. And that's what role our consciousness plays. And it is so important to take control of your consciousness, not let all these outside factors control you, to say, I'm going to use my consciousness in a productive way. I'm going to move into those upper echelons. Will I still feel the tragedies of the world? Might bad things still happen to me? Absolutely. Bad things will happen to you. I've had plenty of bad things happen to me. I lost my home in a wildfire a few years ago, and my wife and I barely escaped running out for our lives. So, losing your home and your office and all your possessions is a pretty bad thing. One of my children died. I mean, I haven't had an easy life, but when you are resilient, you meditate and you tap and you have all of these ways of being, then you find you are able. I mean, you certainly feel the tragedy of, like Ukraine right now. I mean, I was so shattered by the devastation of the Russian invasion, but I did something about it. I started doing nonprofit work with psychologists to train them there. So yes, we still feel the tragedy of the world, but we got to do stuff about it, and that cheers us up and makes us a much brighter light than we otherwise would be. And so you can live in heaven even despite all the ups and downs of the world. It all is a matter of consciousness and what you're doing with your brain, with your mind. We all have these structures in our brain to elevate ourselves to those states of super consciousness and joy and oneness. It's just a matter of turning them on. And again, science gives us techniques and tools to do it now in 30 days. Again, not going to a monastery and giving up all your possessions and taking vows. No need to do any of that stuff, but you do need to use science to bring you into these elevated states.
Awesome. So, Spiritual Intelligence, obviously, that's the book you've referenced the most. People should probably get on that, read that, but also to your website.
Yes. Yeah. So download the free EFT manual and the meditation track. That's at my name, Dawson, just Dawson, gift GIFT, DawsonGift.com. That's where you get the free manual and meditation track. To get the book, plus some additional resources like some videos on this process, go to spiritualintelligencebook.com. That's the second site to go to. That's where you can get the book, and also free meditation tracks and other ways of supporting you and getting that 30-day process moving.
Awesome. So I will put both those things in the show notes. I'm sure you're writing something else. If you've written this much, you're probably already working on something else. Am I correct?
A rather dry and boring textbook right now, and it's on it's for energy healers and coaches, and it's on artificial intelligence and the ethics of artificial intelligence. Um, I Artificial intelligence is presenting us with huge opportunities and huge challenges
Mm-hmm.
as a human species. And so I've written several textbooks for psychology and coaching in the past, so I'm now about to finish that book. So that's the next big thing. And after that, I'm gonna look at what comes next. Spiritual intelligence is a popular science book. Tons of stories about people with spiritual intelligence, tons of research. And then how we apply that is really, really critical. I'm also thinking about writing more about the link between trauma, psychological trauma, and PTSD, and entering these elevated states, because about 2/3 of people experience post-traumatic growth after a tragedy. And it's just not written about enough, not appreciated enough, that the bad stuff in our lives actually drives 2/3 of people who have those shattering experiences: death, destruction, loss. 2/3 of people who go through that, their lives are better a few years later. They've gone through post-traumatic growth. So I really want to highlight this. We pay a lot of attention to the tragedy of PTSD, which we need to be doing, but not to the exclusion of the growth potential of the difficulties in our lives, which can spur us to these transcendent states.
So there's a silver lining to life is suffering.
Absolutely. The research shows, in fact, that most people who reach elevated states of consciousness had pretty wretched childhoods, that the childhood trauma actually is linked to reaching elevated states of consciousness and happiness later on.
Awesome. All right, we'll have to have you back on the show and cover this next book when we get to it, because AI is definitely one of those subjects it's not going anywhere. We're going to have to dig in.
Love to do that, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on, Dawson. You guys have a good day.
All the best to you.